Plunged into the quiet refuge of my library, drowned in the semi-darkness of ancient lamps and the soft rustle of pages, I was lost among the centuries, as if dissolving into the lines of faded manuscripts and forgotten chronicles, storing on their pages the breath of bygone eras, when suddenly, like a sudden gust of wind opened a tightly closed window. The voice of my brother Walter with unexpected directness broke the precious silence that enveloped the secluded hall of rare books. "Melissa, are you still immersed in those old books?" His voice sounded, and in it, as usual, subtle mockery and open criticism were intertwined, as if his every visit here was not so much an act of brotherly concern as a ritual expression of disappointment, which he never shied away from. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. He leaned casually against a bookshelf, as if even in this room, sacred to me as a temple, he did not want to change his manner of being the master of the situation. Dressed in an elegant designer suit, with immaculately ironed lapels and shoes that sparkled like polished obsidian, he was in stark contrast to my modest librarian outfit, a soft cardigan, a simple skirt, and his hair pulled back into a practical bun. His familiar grin, unchanged since our childhood, looked especially defiant now, as if it hid the entire spectrum of his disregard for me, my life, and my choices, as if my very existence within these walls was a joke to him. "Hello, Walter," I said cautiously, carefully returning the antique folio book to its protective beige cloth case, stroking the spine with a love that I thought he never understood. "I didn't expect to find you here." "He sent me to check on you," Walter continued, straightening up with businesslike grace. "Mom's worried that you're going to make a scene on their anniversary tonight." He looked around the library hall, filled with the scent of old paper, wood, and silence, and his gaze was laced with outright contempt, as if every shelf and shelf reminded him of my failure in the eyes of my family. "The librarian in the family," he said with bitterness and bewilderment, not hiding how this reality scratched his ego. "Dad is still trying to explain this to his friends at the club. My name is Melissa Thompson. I am 36 years old. I am the chief librarian of the Central Library of the city. For my family, whose name and fortune have become a symbol of strength and power in business circles, my career choice remains, to put it mildly, a source of discomfort, if not shame. They don't even realize that my quiet life among books hides much more than they can imagine, that something much more ambitious is boiling under this calm exterior than any of their meetings of directors." "I'll be there," I assured him, standing up and looking straight into his eyes with my head held high, not allowing myself a shadow of doubt. "And I'll dress appropriately." "I will," he replied with a slight smile, glancing briefly at the new Rolex watch sparkling on his wrist, as if the importance of the moment lay in demonstrating success. "It's an important evening. I will announce my latest business acquisition. Thompson Industries is now a large conglomerate." "That's great, Walter." "Congratulations," I said, trying to keep my expression neutral, despite the tension clenching my fists in the pockets of my skirt. "Thank you," he replied, but there wasn't a drop of sincere warmth in his voice, or even the usual brotherly pride. "You know, you still have time to get back to the real world. Our corporate library would benefit from someone like you. At least then you'll do something worthwhile." His condescending remark, as always, like a scalpel, tried to cut through the fabric of my confidence, but this time it had no power. I just smiled, thinking about the encrypted laptop neatly hidden in a secret drawer in my office, and the secret meetings I held under an alias, talking to people whose names would never appear in Walter's reports. "I'm quite happy with what I have," I told him firmly. He shrugged his shoulders like a man who was already bored with the conversation, who lost interest as soon as he realized that he would not be able to break the other person. "Remember, at 6 o'clock sharp. And try not to bring any books this time," he said finally, and without waiting for an answer, he turned around and left with the same grace with which he appeared. After he disappeared through the door, I waited for a few minutes, allowing myself to return to calm, as if giving the silence time to regain its power over the space. Then I went to my office, which seemed like an ordinary librarian's workplace, with an ordinary desk, shelves, and a quietly ticking clock, But behind this modest facade were hidden the latest security systems and a powerful specialized computer, not inferior to the equipment in the best analytical centers in the world. After locking the door, I turned on my laptop and connected to a secure server. Video communication windows popped up on the screen one by one: Osaka, Paris, Boston. With each signal, my face was reflected in the darkness of the screen more confidently. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," the assistant greeted me through a clear link. "The deal with Lawrence is ready for final consideration." "Thank you, Lauren," I replied, looking through the documents. Clear, concise, verified to the last comma. "Has the legal department completed its assessment?" "Yes, the conditions are reliable. We are ready to continue when you are ready." Glancing at my watch, I noted to myself that there were still 6 hours left before the anniversary celebration. "Schedule the signing for tomorrow morning, Lauren. And make sure that everything is ready for the announcement." "It's already been done," she confirmed, but there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. "But are you sure about the timing?" I remembered Walter's smug expression, the years of his neglect, every attempt to belittle my interests, and the path I had taken without their approval, and I felt my resolve grow. "Tonight, I will not only celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary, but also step out of the shadows, finally ready to reveal the full depth of my double life, so carefully hidden for many years, in which every morning began in the silence of the archive halls, and every evening in virtual negotiations with the leaders of the world economy, when my name was pronounced. Respectfully, but never associated with the name Thompson. "Of course, tomorrow morning will be perfect," I said confidently after the conversation ended, closing my secure laptop and allowing myself to lean back in my comfortable office chair for a moment, as if letting go of the weight of the last few months, during which I conducted continuous negotiations, executed deals, prepared documents, and, in fact, I was building a new reality, one in which my name would sound not like a shadow of my father's legacy, but as a symbol of my own power and independence. Reflecting on the empire that I, while remaining a humble librarian to everyone, had secretly built out of almost nothing, I felt the same mixture of awe and silent triumph that a sculptor might feel when looking at a completed statue created alone, in the shadows, without applause, but with an understanding of what it contained. All his skills. Thomson Global Partners, which had nothing to do with my brother's brainchild, Walters Thomson Industries, has over the years, unnoticed by the public and analysts, turned into one of the world's leading private investment companies, covering dozens of countries and industries with its tentacles, from technology and medicine to ecology and energy. All this was made possible by a network of shell companies, intricate trusts, and carefully constructed financing structures that hid the true scale of my operations and made it impossible to identify who was behind these investments. For the past 8 years, I have been combining this activity, which, in my internal correspondence with trusted people, we conditionally called secret, with a job that has become not only a cover for me, but also a source of deep satisfaction, the position of chief librarian, surrounded by books, history, knowledge that I absorbed from childhood and which became my true refuge. It was this job that allowed me to deflect suspicion, to create the image of a woman far from the business world, devoted to silence and paper pages. Who would really suspect that a woman who meekly greets visitors to the reading room actually has power that in some cases surpassed the capabilities of my own brother? My phone vibrated, interrupting my thoughts, and I saw a message from my mother, as always without unnecessary words, with a slight touch of demanding, which she mastered perfectly. "Don't forget to style your hair, dear. The Hughes will be there tonight." Ah, the Hughes are another family whose name has become a ritual in our family, as if it should be pronounced with a slight tilt of the head and a special facial expression expressing admiration and the desire to be worthy of their attention. I replied with a brief confirmation, without entering into correspondence, and began to prepare for the evening, following a pre-arranged schedule, which included a hairdresser and fitting an exquisite dress chosen specifically for this event. Although I have never been a proponent of ostentatious luxury, and my tastes have always tended towards restrained elegance, I knew how and when to enter the image that was expected of me, a confident, well-groomed woman with an impeccable sense of style. When I arrived at the salon, I noticed that, to my surprise, it turned out to be completely empty, and in this, perhaps, I once again felt one of the undoubted advantages of being the owner of the building where the salon was located, and the opportunity to make an appointment at a time convenient only to me, without the risk of bumping into someone unnecessary. Emma, my stylist, an older, experienced and always tactful woman who had nothing to do with the secret, greeted me warmly, but there was a restrained formality in her voice today. "It's a family event," I answered her unspoken question as she picked up a comb, and while her hands deftly worked on my hairstyle, I discreetly checked the emails I had received during the day on a secure device. The acquisition of Lawrence, as I expected, went smoothly, and by tomorrow Thomson Global Partners will officially become the owner of a major Asian technology manufacturer, a company that my brother has been chasing for several months, spreading resources, raising the stakes, but never succeeding. The irony was that even if he had received this asset, he would not have known that he was actually working for me through a third company that had long been part of my holding company. "Your brother was here before," Emma said suddenly, without interrupting her work. "He boasted that he was buying some big company. He's trying to buy it. That, I think, is the difference." I didn't comment, just allowed myself a barely noticeable smile, which she, of course, noticed in the reflection of the mirror, and for a moment our eyes met, not like a client and a stylist, but like two women, each of whom understood that there was always something more behind any words. "Let's just say," I said quietly, "that tomorrow's papers will be very interesting." 4 hours later, after returning home and completing the final preparations, I looked at myself in the mirror, assessing not only my appearance, but also the woman I had become. Once a simple librarian, who was considered quiet and a little strange, now stood in front of me in the guise of a woman who could not only fit in, but also look flawless in any social company without losing herself. My dress, a dark blue, custom, made by Valentino, perfectly emphasized my figure and maintained a balance between refined elegance and lack of ostentatious luxury. The jewelry was restrained but impeccable: antique diamond earrings, a Cartier bracelet. All this reminded of the classics of the aesthetics of old money, traditions, and fine taste. But more importantly, I looked exactly as my family had always hoped: their daughter, well-read, sophisticated, finally making an effort to fit in. I received another message, this time from Lauren: "Everything is ready for tomorrow. Are you sure you don't want to reveal this news tonight?" "No," I answered shortly, looking at my reflected gaze in the mirror. "Let them enjoy the party. Tomorrow is very soon." When I pulled up to the brightly lit Thompson family estate, dozens of luxury cars were already lined up along the driveway: Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, Maseratis, reflecting generations of people who did not know what it meant to save money. I drove up in my modest but elegant Audi, another conscious choice, because it was stylish enough not to stand out, but also discreet enough not to arouse suspicion from those who knew how much the librarian earned. Roy, our longtime butler, a man with a noble bearing and an unchanging expression of professional calm, greeted me at the door with a slight bow. "Your parents are in the main hall," he said, pointing in the direction. As I approached, the sounds of the party became clearer: the exquisite whispers of numerous conversations, the clink of crystal glasses filled with champagne, and the soft, carefully tuned chords of a string quartet filled the air, as if the entire space vibrated with elegance and feigned carelessness. It was my parents' world, a world in which glittering lamps reflected in expensive glass glasses, and conversations flowed smoothly and confidently, flavored with the names of companies and the surnames of ancient families, a world that I had once consciously abandoned, at least in public, seeking to find my refuge in a quieter, less ostentatious existence where words weighed more than costumes, and knowledge was more valuable than deals. When I entered the main hall, framed by columns and decorated with floral arrangements, the smell of which reminded me of the summer parties of my childhood, the first thing that pierced the space was my mother's voice, sonorous, still authoritative, despite the years. "Melissa, dear, you look presentable," she said, and despite the cold tone, I took it as a sign of approval, because from her lips such words were certainly an expression of the highest praise bordering on recognition. Hannah Thompson, my mother, has never fully forgiven me for the choice I made, choosing to live among books and knowledge, immersed in the silence of libraries, instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with Walter and joining the flow of the family business. But tonight, on this evening, which was supposed to be not just another holiday, but a milestone, I was ready to play this role, connecting my two worlds, visible and hidden, taking the first steps towards revealing the whole truth about myself. I tried to look my best, thinking through everything to the smallest detail, from my hairstyle to my gestures, so that not a single fold of my dress, not a single word would betray my inner struggle. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said with a soft smile, kissing her gently on the cheek, feeling the cool scent of her perfume, unchanged for years, envelop me, bringing me back to the past. She looked stunning, as always. At 65, she still carried herself with that grace, and style that her friends from the noble circle half-jokingly attributed to a deal with the devil, although I knew it was more the result of relentless discipline and innate taste. "Your father is by the fireplace," she pointed out, already turning away and scanning the room for other guests with whom she needed to exchange the obligatory pleasantries. "Say hello before you slip off to the library." I made my way through the dense crowd of guests, each of whom greeted me with their kisses, formal greetings, and the invariable, slightly condescending questions about my little job at the library, as they put it. Many of these people have known me since childhood, watched me learn to ride horses, how I held a glass of champagne for the first time, how I held myself at the first ball, and still could not understand how it turned out that I chose a life so far from the splendor and expectations of the Thompson family. "That's my girl." My father's loud voice rang out, as always, filled with energy and theatrical warmth, as I came closer. He was standing by the fireplace, surrounded by his usual entourage of golf buddies, former partners, respected men with gray hair at the temples and expensive watches on their wrists. "Come here, let them see you," he added, spreading his arms for a hug, which I entered without hesitation, even if I could tell from his slightly slurred speech that he had started celebrating long before my arrival. "Still buried in those books, huh?" One of his friends, Peter Hughes, chuckled, a man whose family has always competed with ours in matters of prestige and influence, and whose voice was tinged with the same dismissive tone that people who have no idea about the value of knowledge often speak condescendingly about those who live in their world. "Yes, I'm still saving the knowledge for the next generation," I replied, keeping my composure, although a spring of anger was trembling inside. Their laughter was predictable, not malicious, but filled with that slight arrogance with which everything that goes beyond their concept of normal is perceived. "Speaking of the next generation," my father interjected, straightening up and visibly perking up. "Where's your brother? He has big news today." As if on cue, Walter appeared, easily making his way through the crowd with a glass of champagne in his hand, and, as always, dressed with deliberate luxury. His new suit was even more ornate than usual, and the Rolex on his wrist sparkled, catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. He walked to the center of the hall and, raising his hand, called everyone to attract attention, using the self-confidence that had accompanied him since his youth. He always loved being the center of attention, and this evening was another opportunity for him to prove that he was still the main character in this family play. "I'd like to make an announcement," he began, and as if on cue, silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to him. "As some of you know, Thompson Industries is expanding rapidly. Today, I am pleased to announce that we are about to make our largest acquisition. By next week, we will own Lawrence Tech." The applause flooded the room, loud and sincere, as it should be in such a situation. The father was beaming, the mother, pressing a monogrammed handkerchief to her eyes, could barely hold back tears of pride. I sipped my champagne, looking at the stage with an expression of polite interest, patiently waiting for the performance to end. Of course, Walter didn't stop there. "The deal isn't finalized yet," he added with forced modesty, "but my sources assure me it's only a matter of time. The papers are ready for signing." "That's wonderful, son," my father exclaimed, not hiding his pride. "I always knew that there was something worthwhile about you. A real businessman, like your old man." While Walter was basking in the applause and congratulations, handing out smiles and handshakes with the dexterity of an actor, his eyes finally found mine, and an expression flashed across his face that I knew all too well, a mixture of defiance and condescension, which he generously rewarded me with since childhood. "What do you think, sis?" "What is it?" he asked, his tone dripping with a smirk. "Are you ready to admit that you bet on the wrong horse?" I met his gaze calmly, letting the silence hang between us for a little longer than was convenient before choosing my words carefully. "I think," I began cautiously, taking another sip, "that we shouldn't count the chickens in the fall." He laughed, and the others laughed with him, the same ones who always stood by his side, restrained, condescending, as if my words were just a witty attempt to defend their impractical lives. "That's why you'll never become more than you are," he said finally, "hiding in your library while the rest of us build empires." Perhaps I agreed gently, without challenging his winning pose, but unlike him, I at least understand the value of due diligence, the very virtue that my brother's business almost always ignored in favor of speed and showiness, although it is she who makes the difference between bright but short-lived success and quiet, stable power. What moves the world in the shadows? His eyes narrowed slightly, as they always did when I allowed myself to use terms that he considered too academic or arrogant and therefore irritating to him. Walter never liked it when I said such words, because he took them as a personal challenge, as a hint of his intellectual inadequacy, and, in fact, he always felt hurt by it. "Due diligence," he grinned, almost curling his lips into a grimace. "I have the best lawyers in this business." Everything was taken care of. I just smiled modestly, without a trace of mockery, and raised my glass of champagne, allowing the sparkling wine to touch my lips with that slight nonchalance that could be interpreted as indifference or, conversely, as superiority. "Then I guess you'll see everything tomorrow, won't you?" I said in a tone that held the faintest hint of something more than just polite anticipation, and in which one could sense confidence, calmness, and perhaps even promise. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, and a brief look of confusion appeared on his face, as if he had caught something disturbing in my words, but did not have time to decipher it, because before he could ask further questions, Mom clapped her hands and called everyone to go to the dining room, where dinner was set. The dining room was the epitome of the very elegance of the old world, which is reverently written about in memoirs: shiny mahogany, polished to a mirror shine, sparkling porcelain, hand-painted, crystal in which the lights of the chandeliers played, and silverware, passed down in our family from generation to generation, like relics. As I approached the table, taking my place at the far end, away from the honored guests, I couldn't help but notice with a slight smile the carefully arranged arrangement of the chairs, which showed a subtle, almost invisible disregard, as if my place here was still conditional. Snacks were being served, and at that time Walter, sitting on the opposite side of the table, was having a heated conversation, accompanying his speeches with expressive gestures, demonstrating not only confidence, but also a fascinating sense of self-importance. He boasted of his business acumen, his strategies, and his ability to turn dust into gold, as he put it. I, in turn, intervened in the conversation only when it was necessary out of politeness, allowing myself a maximum of short, restrained answers, and the rest of the time I enjoyed the cuisine, expertly executed by the chef, who managed to create a symphony of flavors in each dish. Leaning towards me with a slight movement of her shoulder, Mrs. Hughes, whose seat was next to me, addressed me in a voice that showed sincere bewilderment, covered with a veil of politeness. "You were so smart at school, Melissa. You could be anything. Why did you decide to devote your life to books?" I froze, knowing that in just a few hours her view of me might change beyond recognition, but for now, while I was still just a librarian, I had to keep my mask on. "Books are far from a waste of time," I replied calmly, putting down my fork and looking at her with polite attention. "They teach us to see deeper, to understand that things are not always what they seem, and, most importantly, they give us the tools to distinguish between truth and facade." She shook her head, and a look of disappointment crossed her face, not malicious, but typical of those who have never seen value in reflection. "Well, at least your brother is continuing the family business," she sighed, raising her voice slightly, as if reminding me of this for the purpose of instruction. "It must be difficult to watch his progress while you remain in his shadow." "It's not as difficult as you might think," I replied with a slight hint of amusement in my voice, raising my glass and not allowing a single muscle on my face to betray my true attitude. The dinner continued, filled with what I eventually learned to recognize and accept with inner calmness: subtle jokes disguised as compliments, ambiguous remarks, hints of missed opportunities. I let these words slide off me like rain from the surface of a stretched probe, without resistance, but also without penetrating deep. When dessert was served, the thinnest cakes, fruit tartlets and dark chocolate truffles with golden dust, Walter stood up again, holding a glass at arm's length, and attracted the attention of everyone present. "Thank you, Mom and Dad," he proclaimed loudly, his voice confident and resonant, "for teaching me everything about business and showing me what success is." He paused, looking at me, and added with a slight emphasis, "And to my sister, who clearly demonstrates that not everyone is made for the business world." There was a polite chuckle in the audience, the one that always sounds between relatives when something is said that is a little more pointed than decency allows, but veiled enough so that it cannot be called rudeness. I raised a toast with everyone else, keeping a serene expression on my face, while my thoughts were already confidently rushing forward, to the folder of documents that lay in the safe of my office, to the morning press release that was supposed to change the course of Thompson Industries, and to the moment when the time would come to tell everything. Later, towards the end of the evening, Walter ambushed me at the dessert table, a grin never leaving his face, as if the evening had been a series of victories and triumphs for him. "Enjoying the party?" "What is it?" he asked with feigned lightness. "That's great," I replied with a polite smile, hiding the throbbing feeling of anticipation inside me. "Mom and Dad must be thrilled," he boasted, straightening his tie and glancing around the room again, as if everything here was proof of his superiority. Although it would be nice if both of their children were successful. I chose a chocolate truffle, carefully picking it up with thin tongs and examining it for a while, as if these dark edges, covered with a light sheen, hid the secrets of the universe that only I could decipher. "You know, Walter, success doesn't always depend on who makes the most noise," I said softly, but with a clear intonation, putting into the words not so much a reproach as a philosophical truth that he probably wouldn't want to accept, but which he still couldn't ignore. He snorted disdainfully, as if he had heard another maxim from a lecture that he had not ordered, but which, to his annoyance, nevertheless struck a chord inside. "No, tell that to my bank account," he said with a sarcastic grin, toying with his empty glass. "How much does a librarian earn now?" "Enough to buy these shoes." He nodded at my elegant shoes, which I deliberately chose, not the most expensive in the wardrobe, but perfectly balanced between refined taste and calm elegance. "I know how to handle money, you know," I replied calmly, glancing at my shoes with a barely perceptible smile, as if reminding myself that true value is never measured by the value of surfaces. He finished his champagne in one gulp, as if he wanted to emphasize with this gesture that the conversation was over. "Yeah, it was fun," he said, setting his glass down on the table with a light thud. "But I need to meet people and make deals. Tomorrow is the big day with this Lawrence deal." When he waved goodbye and disappeared into the crowd of guests, I took out my phone without wasting a minute and quickly texted Lauren, knowing that at that moment she, like me, was not just awake, but closely following all the elements of the operation. "Is everything ready for tomorrow?" I wrote, and her reply came instantly, as always, with precision, which I admired from the first day of our work. "Everything is ready. The press release comes out at 8 a.m. sharp. Do you want me to send you the final numbers?" "There's no need," I replied, and a smile played on my lips, light, barely noticeable, but full of deep satisfaction. "I'll see them in the papers along with everyone else." The party ended around midnight, and as I said goodbye to the guests, I had to listen to the last stream of condescending remarks that, as always, accompanied any meeting with my family, words shrouded in the tinsel of care, but laced with the steel of disappointment. "You really should consider Walter's offer," Mom said when I kissed her on the cheek goodbye. "A corporate library would suit you much better." "I'll think about it," I lied softly, without blinking, with the inner clarity with which a person lies, knowing that his truth is too great to be understood now. On the way home, I thought about the day ahead, about what drastic changes it would bring not only to me, but to our entire dynasty. For 8 years, I've been secretly building my empire, reshaping the financial map of the world, remaining only a girl with books to my family. Tomorrow they will realize how wrong they were, and this truth will be much louder for them than any speeches. The next morning, I arrived at the library at exactly 7 a.m., as I had done every day for the past 8 years, and as always, my footsteps in comfortable shoes echoed through the marble corridors, filling them with a sound familiar to regulars who came to the opening without wondering why the head librarian he follows the routine so scrupulously. Lauren was already there, tablet in hand, looking like an ordinary employee, busy with routine duties. But here at the library, she was my assistant librarian, and outside of it, she was the chief operating officer of Thomson Global Partners, one of the most insightful women I've worked with. Lauren greeted me quietly as we entered my office, closing the door behind us and setting a manual lock on it. "Everything's ready," she said in a businesslike tone, sinking into the chair opposite my desk. "The lawyers are meeting in Osaka, and the press release is due out in 50 minutes. I put my bag on the table and turned on my secure laptop, my fingers confidently touching the keys, as if continuing the ritual that began my every day, but today it was something more, the day when the mask would fall off. "Is there any news from Walter's team?" I asked, not looking up, but knowing that she would catch all the meanings behind this question. "They're already getting ready," she said with a slight smirk, still confident that they'll make a deal. I couldn't help but smile, imagining the look on Walter's face when he realized that all his confidence was built on sand. "Let's give them a few more minutes of hope," I said, and Lauren nodded understandingly. At exactly 7:15 a.m., my private phone rang, its vibration cutting through the morning silence as a signal for action. It was Mr. Lawrence's translator, whose voice sounded clear. "Miss Thompson, everything is ready." "Fine, let's continue," I replied, and the next few minutes became a whirlwind of documents, electronic signatures, official confirmations, and legal formalities, through which we moved with the precision of a surgical operation. By 8 o'clock in the morning, Thomson Global Partners had officially acquired Lawrence Tech, acquiring ownership of its subsidiaries, patents, research laboratories, and the entire package of advanced technologies that my brother had dreamed of. Lauren quickly confirmed that the press release was already being sent out, and headlines were starting to appear on news agencies' feeds. I opened several tabs on my laptop, watching our story break through the digital walls, breaking into the public consciousness. It breaks. A mysterious buyer acquires Lawrence Tech. The global financial giant Thomson Global Partners reveals the identity of the founder. Wall Street is stunned to learn that an expert in the field of librarianship, a quiet, inconspicuous woman who has never been talked about loudly in high business circles, has been named a business magnate, the man behind one of the most ambitious deals in recent years, and this contrast between my official title and the real power I wield possessed became the paradox that instantly captured the attention of the press. My phone went on, vibrating and ringing, as if each signal was the pulse of a world that was just now beginning to realize who I really was. And the first call, as expected, was from Walter, whose pride seemed to be no less hurt than his business ambitions. "What the hell is this?" He exhaled, not wasting time on formalities, his voice filled with confusion, irritation, and, through it all, notes of almost childish resentment. He couldn't understand, couldn't accept that behind the librarian's mask there was a woman who beat him at his own game. "Good morning to you, too, brother," I replied calmly, as if not noticing the sharpness of his words, allowing myself to enjoy how easily I tipped the scales. "I assume you've seen the news." "It's impossible. Thomson Global Partners is." "It's not like that. You can't be the founder. You're not the CEO." "Actually, yes." "And it's been 8 years," I replied, enjoying the moment of disclosure, like a theater actor delivering a key line in the finale. "I understand your confusion. After all, I'm just a librarian, right?" I could almost hear his brain working feverishly, papers rustling behind the scenes of his consciousness, as if he was sorting through documents, looking for something that would give him grounds to dispute what was happening, to reject the obvious. But I had a deal. The documents were ready. He exclaimed, and his voice sounded as if the world he lived in was rapidly collapsing. Is that so? I asked with an innocent intonation, which nevertheless contained irony. Maybe you should read the fine print. Lawrence Tech has been working with us for several months now. We were just waiting for the right moment to complete everything. We are. His voice wavered, became uncertain. Who is we? My team. My company. My empire. I paused after each word, letting each one sink into his mind like drops of ink falling into water. You know, the one I built while you were busy underestimating my career choice. The line broke. He didn't hang up. I could almost feel him freeze, clutching the phone in his hand, overloaded with information he couldn't digest. Lauren, trying not to smile too widely, looked up at me. How long before the parents' call? I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. Right on schedule, she said, glancing at her watch, and as soon as she said that, the phone screen lit up. Name, Melissa Hannah Thompson. My mother's voice was so harsh it could have cut through glass. What have you done? Good morning, Mom, I replied, keeping my tone even and polite. I'm a little busy right now, but maybe we could discuss this over dinner. She repeated with disbelief. Do you even understand what's going on? Your dad's phone won't stop ringing. The Hughes, the club, all demand an explanation. They want to know how our librarian daughter secretly built a multi-billion-dollar company. I could hear my father somewhere behind her trying to deal with the incoming calls, his voice barely audible, coming as if through glass. Tell her to come here immediately. I heard him, but the answer was already ready. I have a whole day of meetings, and it really is, I said firmly. The acquisition of Lawrence Tech is just the beginning. But I would be happy to invite you to dinner. Tonight, at 6. I have. You? Her mother's voice was filled with skepticism. You mean your little apartment near the library? No. I mean, my penthouse on Calm Avenue. I'll send you the address. There was a pause. A long, intense silence, full of misunderstanding and suspicion. A large building in the city center? What is it? She finally asked. Is that so? I hadn't noticed. See you at 6, Mom, I said, and ended the call, after which I allowed myself a deep, long breath, as if an 8-year burden had suddenly lifted from my shoulders, which I carried in silence, maintaining the facade while creating something truly monumental. Are you ready for the third stage? Lauren asked, and I nodded without hesitation. Send out a second press release. This case was even more significant than the first one. The text of the press release read, Thomson Global Partners announces merger with East Asian technology giants. The amount of the deal is billions of dollars, figures that send a chill down the backs of analysts and competitors. This merger had been prepared for several months, with the precision of a jewelry operation, and was a strategic move designed not only to strengthen our position, but also to consolidate our image as an invincible player on the world stage. We timed it perfectly, and the merger coincided with the acquisition of Lawrence Tech, amplifying the effect of each event and turning them into one loud, undeniable triumph. By the time my family gathered for dinner, the business world was still trying to process the consequences of the two biggest deals of the decade, and at the center of both of those deals was me, the one they used to underestimate, the one they just called the librarian. The day passed in a rapid and well-organized rhythm, in a series of carefully planned events, each of which was not just part of the schedule, but a measured step towards further strengthening my position and consolidating a new identity that finally emerged from the shadows. Meetings with analysts, interviews with leading financial observers, strategic sessions with key partners, all this merged into a rich canvas of events in which every detail played a role, from facial expressions at a photo shoot to the intonation in a voice during a conversation with investors. The only interview I agreed to do that day was for the Wall Street Journal, and I did it deliberately so that my story would be heard for the first time in a publication that usually talked about people like my brother. I was talking about books, not as a sentimental memory, but as the foundation of thinking. She said that for many people, the experience of working in the field of librarianship turned out to be, oddly enough, the ideal preparation for building a global empire, because where others saw pages, I saw structures, logical connections, and decision-making algorithms. Information is power, I said, looking straight into the reporter's eyes, and everything was contained in those words: the reason, the method, the result. By 7:10 p.m., I had left behind the facade of the library, the one that had served as a cover for many years, and headed to the place that was my true home, my fortress, the penthouse on the top floor on Comm Avenue, an architectural masterpiece immersed in glass and steel, towering over the city and absorbing I am the light of his lights. For 6 years I lived here, building an empire behind the scenes, while for the public I rented a modest apartment near the library, overlooking the park and a tiny kitchen, carefully cultivating the image of a woman whose maximum ambition was silence and bookshelves. The elevator, personal and without buttons, opened directly into a spacious living room, furnished with that laconic elegance that needs no proof and requires no excuses. Here, among the floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the Atlantic, there were built-in panels that connected me to operations in Japan, Germany, and Singapore. Lauren organized a dinner at the best restaurant in the city, another asset of Thomson Global Partners, only formally bearing a different name. The dining room shone with refined luxury, where every detail, from hand-engraved glasses to linen tablecloths, spoke not of wealth, but of dignity. Exactly at 1800 hours, as agreed, my family arrived. Walter got off the elevator first, his usual swagger seeming to disappear, replaced by a restrained rage that he could barely hide. He was followed by Mom and Dad, both visibly shaken and stunned, as if everything they believed in had collapsed in one day. Even Roy, our unfailingly level-headed butler, stood a little confused, as if trying to reconcile the image of a failed family in his mind with the reality of one of the most influential and richest people in the city. "Welcome to my house," I greeted them, pointing to the panorama of the city spread out in front of the windows like a work of art. "How much?" Walter asked in a strained voice, his eyes darting between the interior and my figure, as if he was still trying to find a trick, an error in logic. "How long have I been lying to you?" I asked, heading to the bar, where thin bottles lined up on shelves reflected the warm light. I wasn't lying about anything. I'm a librarian. I love books. And I just happen to run a global financial empire. Mom collapsed onto one of the leather sofas, and despite her always perfect posture, she looked broken. "But why? What is it?" she whispered. "Why the deception? Why let us believe that you're a loser?" I finished for her, holding out my glass. "Maybe because you've never looked beyond your assumptions. You saw what you wanted to see, a disappointed daughter who gave up the glitter for the sake of silence." Dad stood at the window, looking down where the lights of the city twinkled like stars, and muttered to himself. "All this time. All these companies, mysterious acquisitions. It was you." "Thomson Global Partners," Walter said, like a sentence. "The competition that everyone is trying to figure out. A shadow empire changing the market." I couldn't help but smile a little. That sounds nice. Although I prefer to think of it as an empire of knowledge. After all, wasn't it you, Dad, who always said that knowledge is power? He turned to me, and for the first time there was no reproach or doubt in his gaze, only respect mixed with a new awareness. "The deal with Lawrence," he said slowly. "How long have you been planning it?" "About 8 months," I replied. "Although I have had a controlling stake in subsidiaries for more than a year." The anger on Walter's face was replaced by pure disbelief. "You've been playing with me all this time." "I wasn't playing, Walter," I corrected him calmly. "I was competing. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" A real competition that will show who is better in business. But it wasn't fair. He flared up. You had insider information. Secret resources. Inside information. I laughed, the sound echoing through the room. You mean the ones you brag about when you get them from your golf buddies? Those deals that are made on yachts and private resorts? No, Walter. I built my empire using only intelligence, hard work, and an understanding of how information is transmitted that most people can't even read. Setting the glass with a soft clink on the lacquered surface of the table, I looked around at my family, who were still in a state of mute amazement, as if each of them had just come out of a prolonged dream in which I remained the same, comfortable in my predictability, and now, waking up, they were trying to come to terms with reality, where all their ideas, the claims of power, success, and status turned out to be imperfect, if not false. This empire, which now stood between us as living evidence of my journey, was built not only on capital and connections, which they used to appeal to in every business deal, not on family partnerships or indoor golf clubs, but on skill, strategy, and a tireless desire to comprehend, analyze, apply, on that what the books have taught me, and what I have been able to do with this knowledge, transforming it into real power. In a small library, where I once, as a girl with shining eyes and endless curiosity, immersed myself in the worlds of history, economics, and philosophy, I found not just information, but also a look that could discern the essence behind the facade, the structure behind the chaos, and it was there that the advantage that others did not notice was born. Because it didn't shout about itself and didn't wear expensive suits. One evening at dinner, in the same room, amid the crystal clink of glasses and delicate dishes, to the sounds of the piano coming through the ajar doors from the neighboring living room, my mother, looking around the space and seemingly unable to find words to express her confusion, lingered her gaze on the elegant table setting, noting how carefully everything was chosen, and she associated this level of aesthetics with my, as she put it, generous expenses. I smiled and gently turned her attention to what was really important, the meaning of what was happening, the experience that we were living here and now, and the opportunity to finally talk to each other without decorations and grades. Walter, who was sitting a little apart, with a frown on his forehead and a look, still stubbornly searching for vulnerability in my position, suddenly spoke with a note of concern, clearly unsure of my further business steps, as if he was afraid that my next step would completely leave him behind. Without waiting for this uncertainty to turn into detachment, I proposed a partnership, outlining to him, without pressure, but with reasoned clarity, how much his company needs modernization, a different perspective, and a global perspective that I am ready to provide. My father, who had been silent and attentive to every word, spoke for the first time, supporting my idea, not so much out of family solidarity, but because he saw in this a real opportunity for Walter to stop chasing the form and do something really meaningful. As the dinner continued, the tension gradually dissolved into conversations that, as I realized, became real for the first time in many years, without masks, without roles. There came a moment of revelation and reconciliation when I frankly told about my journey, how I built my company from the everyday life of a librarian, how I used every minute of silence to negotiate, how my daily routes from the reading room to the archive were part of the complex logistics of real power. The initial skepticism of Walter, whom I once knew to be exceptionally competitive and self-confident, was replaced by admiration, curiosity, and then interest in our potential partnership. Towards the end of the evening, Mom, having regained her voice, asked why I decided to reveal everything now. I explained that it was time to show that success is not always expressed in familiar symbols, in designer suits, in the glitter of a Rolex, in the names on the doors of conference rooms. True success can live in the silence of the library, in the modesty of appearance, in the imperceptible steps from which the greatest achievements grow. Walter added, almost apologetically, that it was also a reminder of how easy it is to judge superficially without bothering to look deeper. When everyone had left, leaving behind empty glasses, muffled footsteps on the marble and the faint scent of evening perfume, I was left alone with Lauren, my reliable ally, the only one who knew the whole truth from the very beginning. We sat on the terrace, leaning on the glass railing, watching the lights of the city slowly sink into the night, and I remembered that evening, how it passed, how the storm was reflected in the faces of my family, pain, surprise, pride. The shares, as Lauren reported with a slight smile, soared, and this was the best proof that the world was ready to accept a new reality in which a librarian could become a billionaire. We were planning an official announcement of the merger in the coming days, at an international conference, and I hoped that by that time Walter would have finally accepted not only a new business model, but also a new, more meaningful way of cooperation, in which there would be no place for envy, only respect and mutual strength. This evening was not just a dinner, it became a milestone, the moment when old stereotypes collapsed, when we allowed ourselves to see each other anew, and in this look there was something more than recognition, understanding. I thought about those emotions that, despite my resilience, left deep traces, tears of regret on the face of my mother, who, perhaps for the first time, truly felt sorry that she underestimated me, and the shining pride in my father's eyes when he looked at me not as a daughter, but as an equal. An admirable partner. The next day, I entered the library at 7 a.m. as usual. Familiar faces, the same readers, the same colleagues, the same silence, broken only by the rustle of pages, and no one treated me differently, no one started talking louder or more cautiously, no one looked at me with trepidation. They still saw me as their librarian. Despite the fact that my face appeared in all major business publications in the country, here, within these walls, I remained the same as I always was. And perhaps it was my most significant triumph that in a world where appearance and prestige are revered, I was able to create something authentic, independent of image, brands, and the approval of the elite. I was still the same Melissa, the librarian, still in love with books, but now I was both a billionaire and the founder of an empire that grew out of silence. After all, knowledge comes in many forms, and sometimes the most influential are the ones you least expect.